The gun blast echoed through the chapel like thunder on a clear day, sending Zara Zimmerman's heart racing faster than a spooked Mustang as the bullet shattered the window above the altar. It wasn't an outlaw raid that had interrupted her wedding day, it was the truth, arriving with perfect dramatic timing just as the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union. Las Vegas, Nevada Territory, 1876. The settlement was still young and wild, but even by frontier standards, what happened next would be talked about for years to come. "I object." The woman at the chapel entrance lowered her pistol, her green eyes blazing. "Because Benjamin Porter already has a wife. Me." Zara stood frozen in her white dress, veil still covering her face as she turned to her groom. Benjamin's face had gone ashen, confirming without words what the strange woman claimed. "Nancy," he stammered. "I can explain to the sheriff," the woman snarled, as two deputies appeared behind her. Benjamin's eyes darted around the chapel like a cornered animal before he lunged toward the side door, shoving past Zara so roughly that she stumbled backward. Her heel caught on her dress train, and she would have fallen if not for strong hands catching her elbows. "Steady there, Miss Zimmerman," said a deep voice from behind. She turned to find Grant Nicholson, a rancher who owned land north of town. They'd only spoken a handful of times at social gatherings, but she recognized his sun-weathered face and kind eyes immediately. Unlike the other men in formal attire, he wore a simple black vest over a white shirt, his cowboy hat held respectfully at his side. "He's getting away," Zara said numbly as the chapel erupted in chaos. Her mother was sobbing, her father shouting at the deputies to pursue Benjamin, and guests were either rushing outside or clustered in shocked huddles. "The law will catch up to him," Grant said, his voice calm amid the storm. "Men like that don't outrun their misdeeds for long." Zara looked up at the decorated altar where she was supposed to have become Mrs. Benjamin Porter moments ago. The flowers, the ribbons, the specially ordered cake waiting at her parents' home, all for nothing. "I should have known," she whispered. "There were signs." "Not your fault that a snake wore a gentleman's clothes," Grant replied. The guests began filtering out, awkward condolences and pitying glances thrown her way. Her parents approached, her mother dabbing at tears with a handkerchief. "Zara, darling, let's get you home," her mother said, reaching for her arm. Zara stepped back, suddenly unable to bear the thought of returning home to face the planned celebration turned wake. The humiliation of being jilted was crushing enough, but being deceived so thoroughly Benjamin had been married all along made her question her own judgment. "I need a moment," she said, voice surprisingly steady. "Please, go ahead. I'll follow shortly." Her father looked like he might protest, but her mother pulled him away with a whispered word. Soon, the chapel emptied except for Zara, Grant, who still lingered nearby, and the preacher who was awkwardly gathering his Bible and papers. "Miss Zimmerman," the preacher said gently, "I am deeply sorry for this unfortunate situation. In 30 years of performing marriages, I've never—" "It's not your fault, Reverend Miller," Zara said. She finally removed her veil, feeling oddly formal still wearing it when there would be no marriage. "You didn't know either." The preacher nodded sympathetically and retreated to his office, leaving Zara alone with Grant. "I should go," Grant said, placing his hat back on his head. "Unless there's something I can do for you, Miss Zimmerman." Zara stared at the altar, at the rings that still sat on the Bible where Benjamin had abandoned them. Her ring, a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother, he'd claimed. Another lie, no doubt. "You know what the worst part is, Mr. Nicholson?" she asked quietly. "It's not the humiliation. It's that I truly believed in those vows I was about to take. For better or worse, In sickness and health, I meant every word I was ready to say. Grant's eyes softened as he looked at her. He was a man of few words, known around town as hardworking, fair, and private. Not one for social gatherings, his presence at the wedding had been something of a surprise to many. "Vows aren't just words, Miss Zimmerman," he said. "They're promises, sacred ones." "Clearly not to everyone," she replied bitterly. The church fell silent save for the distant sounds of commotion outside as the deputies organized a search party. Zara smoothed her hands over her dress, a beautiful creation that had cost more than her father had initially wanted to spend. All wasted now. Suddenly, Grant moved toward the altar, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. He stopped at the step below where she stood and looked up at her. "Then let me finish the vows," he said. Zara blinked at him in confusion. "I don't understand." "Not as a husband," Grant clarified quickly, "but as a promise that not all men are like Benjamin Porter. Those vows mean something to some of us, Miss Zimmerman." For the first time since the gunshot, Zara felt a flutter of something other than humiliation and shock. What Grant was suggesting was unorthodox, perhaps even improper, but something in his earnest expression made her nod. "Repeat after me," she said softly, recalling the words she had memorized for weeks. "I promise to be faithful, to respect and honor you, to cherish our friendship and love." Grant removed his hat again and repeated her words, his voice steady and sure. They weren't being married, there was no preacher pronouncing them anything, but as he recited the vows that had meant so much to her, Zara felt a strange sense of healing begin. Through joy and sorrow, plenty and want, sickness and health, they continued together, as long as we both shall live. When they finished, Grant reached for the simple handkerchief in his pocket and gently wiped a tear from her cheek that she hadn't realized had fallen. "There," he said. "Now you know at least one man in Las Vegas who would have meant those words." "Thank you," Zara whispered, feeling oddly unburdened. "That was unexpected but kind." Grant offered his arm. "May I escort you home, Miss Zimmerman? I suspect you might prefer not to walk through town alone just now." She placed her hand on his arm, grateful for the steady strength she felt there. As they walked out of the chapel into the bright Nevada sunlight, Zara realized that while one door had slammed shut, really perhaps another had quietly opened. Her reputation would suffer, of course. Being left at the altar was scandalous enough, but discovering the groom was already married added a layer of gossip that would keep tongues wagging for months. Yet as they walked down the main street toward her parents' home, Grant's solid presence beside her made the whispers and stares slightly more bearable. "May I ask you something, Mr. Nicholson?" she said as they turned onto the residential street where her family's house stood. "Of course." "Why were you at the wedding? We're hardly more than acquaintances." Grant hesitated, then said, "Your father invited me. I'd sold him some horses last month for your—" He stopped, perhaps realizing mentioning her honeymoon trip might be painful. "For the trip Benjamin and I were meant to take," she finished for him. "You can say it." "Yes," Grant nodded. "Your father was pleased with the horses and extended the invitation. I don't normally attend such social functions, but I thought it good business to accept." They reached the gate to her family's home, a handsome two-story house that was one of the nicer residences in Las Vegas. Already, Zara could see the flurry of activity inside as servants removed wedding decorations, and her mother presumably directed everyone with tear-stained cheeks. "Well, I'm glad you did," Zara said, removing her hand from his arm. "Otherwise, who would have caught me when I stumbled?" A hint of a smile touched Grant's lips. "Anyone would have done the same. But it wasn't anyone, it was you." She hesitated, then added, "And it was you who thought to give me back something that Benjamin stole." "And what was that?" "Faith," she said simply. Not in men necessarily, but in the meaning of those vows. Grant's eyes, a warm brown that reminded her of fertile soil after rain, held hers for a long moment. "Good day, Miss Zimmerman. If you ever need anything, I know where to find you," she finished. "At the Rocking Inn Ranch north of town." He seemed surprised she knew the name of his property, which made her smile despite everything. "I pay attention, Mr. Nicholson, more than people realize." She paused. "Thank you again." With a tip of his hat, Grant turned and walked away, his tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Zara watched him go, then squared her shoulders and entered the house to face her family and the wreckage of what should have been the happiest day of her life. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of hushed conversations, canceled arrangements, and returned gifts. Benjamin Porter had not been caught, rumor had it he'd fled toward California, and his first wife Nancy had stayed in town only long enough to give a statement to the sheriff, before departing for St. Louis, where her family lived. Zara had received several calls from concerned friends, and a few from those merely curious for details of the scandal. She bore it all with as much dignity as she could muster, but by the end of the second week, she longed for escape from the sympathetic looks and whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. On a Tuesday morning, she made a decision. Donning her riding clothes instead of the customary morning dress, she announced to her startled mother that she was going for a ride. "Alone?" her mother gasped. "Zara, your reputation has already suffered enough without mother," Zara interrupted firmly. "I'll take Samuel with me if it makes you feel better, but I cannot sit in this house another day listening to you and father debate what to do with me as if I were damaged goods." Her mother looked hurt. "We don't think of you that way. Perhaps not intentionally." Zara softened her tone. "But I need fresh air and open spaces. I'll be back by luncheon." Before her mother could protest further, Zara hurried to the stables where their elderly groom, Samuel, was tending to the horses. He raised no objections to saddling her mare, Penny, though he insisted on accompanying her as propriety demanded. They rode north out of town, following the winding dirt road that paralleled a small stream. The Nevada landscape stretched before them, vast and open under a crystalline blue sky. For the first time since the disastrous wedding day, Zara felt like she could breathe. "Where to, Miss Zara?" Samuel asked as they reached a fork in the road. Zara hesitated only briefly. "Let's continue north. I'd like to see how far we can go before turning back." Samuel nodded, though she noticed his questioning glance. They both knew what lay north: several smaller homesteads and, eventually, the Rocking Inn Ranch. Whether her choice of direction was coincidental or deliberate, Zara wasn't entirely sure herself. They rode for another hour, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Just as Zara was about to suggest they turn back, she spotted a rider approaching from the distance. The figure grew clearer as it neared, and she recognized Grant Nicholson astride his distinctive black stallion. "Miss Zimmerman," he called as he drew closer, tipping his hat. "Samuel." He nodded at the groom. "This is unexpected." "Mr. Nicholson," Zara returned. "We were just enjoying the fine weather." Grant smiled slightly. "All the way out here?" "The weather is particularly fine in this direction," she replied, a hint of mischief in her voice that surprised even her. It felt good to joke, to speak without the weight of her humiliation hanging on every word. "I was just heading into town for supplies," Grant said. "My ranch is just over that ridge if you'd care to rest your horses before turning back. My housekeeper, Mrs. Flanagan, would be happy for the company, I'm sure." Samuel looked to Zara, clearly waiting for her decision. It was unconventional to accept such an invitation, especially given recent events, but Zara found herself nodding. "That would be lovely, thank you." Grant led them over the ridge, and Zara caught her first glimpse of the Rocking Inn Ranch. The main house was modest but well built, with a wide porch and newly painted shutters. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and a large corral held about a dozen horses. It wasn't the largest ranch in the area, but it was clearly prosperous and well-maintained. As they approached, a matronly woman with gray streaked hair emerged from the house, wiping her hands on an apron. "Mr. Nicholson, I wasn't expecting you back so." Her words trailed off as she spotted Zara and Samuel. "Oh, visitors, Mrs. Flanagan. May I present Miss Zara Zimmerman and Samuel Davis. They've ridden up from town and I offered them a chance to rest before their return journey." Mrs. Flanagan's eyes widened slightly at Zara's name. The gossip had clearly spread throughout the territory, but she quickly recovered her composure. "Of course. Come in, come in. I've just made fresh lemonade and there are biscuits cooling on the rack." Samuel declined the invitation to enter the house, preferring to tend to the horses, but Zara dismounted and followed Mrs. Flanagan inside. The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and a few touches that spoke of care. Handmade quilts draped over chairs, pressed wildflowers framed on the walls. "Please sit." Mrs. Flanagan gestured to the kitchen table. "Mr. Nicholson, will you still be going to town?" Grant glanced at Zara, then shook his head. "The supplies can wait until tomorrow. I should see to our guests." As Mrs. Flanagan bustled about preparing refreshments, Grant took a seat across from Zara. His hands, she noticed, were calloused from work, but clean and well kept. "I hope this isn't too forward of me," Grant said quietly, "but how have you been, truly?" The unexpected directness of his question caught Zara off guard. Most people either avoided the topic altogether or spoke in vague platitudes about time healing all wounds. "Some days are better than others," she answered honestly. "The gossip is difficult. Not because I still care for Benjamin, I realize now that I never really knew him, but because I dislike being the subject of everyone's pity." Grant nodded. "People will find something new to talk about soon enough. That's the way of small towns. Is that why you live out here instead of in town?" To avoid the gossip, a smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "That's one reason. But mostly, I prefer the company of horses to most people. They're honest about their intentions." Mrs. Flanagan returned with a tray of lemonade and biscuits still warm from the oven. As they ate, the conversation turned to safer topics: the unusually mild weather, the upcoming harvest festival, Grant's horses which he bred and trained for both work and racing. "You should see his prize stallion, Thunderbolt," Mrs. Flanagan said proudly, as if the horse were her own accomplishment. "Fastest thing on 4 legs in the territory." "You race?" Zara asked, surprised. Grant didn't seem the type for showy displays. "Occasionally," he admitted. "It supplements the ranch income, and I enjoy the challenge of training a good racing horse." After they finished refreshments, Grant offered to show Zara around the property, with Mrs. Flanagan as chaperone and Samuel invited along as well. The tour was entirely proper, though Zara found herself wishing for a moment alone with Grant to thank him again for his kindness at the chapel. The opportunity came when they reached the corral where Thunderbolt was being exercised by one of Grant's ranch hands. Mrs. Flanagan had stopped to speak with Samuel about a remedy for saddle sores, leaving Grant and Zara slightly ahead. "He's magnificent," Zara said, watching the powerful black stallion circle the corral. "He is," Grant agreed. "Proud, sometimes stubborn, but with a good heart. The best horses are like that. They make you earn their trust, but once you have it, they're loyal to the end." "Unlike some men," Zara said wryly. Grant turned to face her. "Miss Zimmerman, Zara," he hesitated, then continued. I want you to know that what happened with Porter reflects on him, not you. Anyone with sense can see that." Zara felt a flush warm her cheeks at his use of her first name. "Thank you. And please, after reciting wedding vows together, I think you've earned the right to call me Zara." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "Under the circumstances, I suppose that's true." "I've been meaning to ask," she ventured. "That day, why did you really stay behind in the chapel when everyone else left?" Grant was quiet for a moment. "I saw something in your eyes, disappointment, yes, but also a deeper hurt. Not just for the loss of Porter, but for the loss of something you believed in." He looked out at the horizon. "I know something about that kind of loss." Before she could ask what he meant, Mrs. Flanagan and Samuel caught up to them, and the moment for private conversation passed. Soon after, Zara realized they should start back to town before her parents became worried. As they prepared to leave, Grant helped her mount Penny, his hands strong and steady as he boosted her into the saddle. "You're welcome at the rocking and any time, Miss Zimmerman," he said, reverting to formality in front of the others. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Nicholson," she replied. Then, impulsively, she added, "Perhaps you'll call on us in town sometime. My father would love to hear more about your horses." Something flickered in Grant's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. "I might do that," he said. As they rode back toward Las Vegas, Samuel a respectful distance behind her, Zara found herself smiling. The day had been unexpected but refreshing, like Grant himself. True to his word, Grant called at the Zimmerman home the following week. Zara's father, always interested in business prospects, welcomed him warmly, while her mother was politely reserved, no doubt concerned about encouraging a connection that might stir up more gossip so soon after the wedding disaster. That first visit led to another, and soon Grant was calling regularly, ostensibly to discuss horses with Mr. Zimmerman, but inevitably spending time in conversation with Zara as well. They discovered shared interests in literature and music, though Grant admitted he hadn't had much opportunity to attend concerts since moving to Nevada. "The last real performance I heard was in Denver 3 years ago," he told her one afternoon as they sat in the parlor, Mrs. Zimmerman pretending to sew while chaperoning from across the room. "A violinist from Europe. I don't remember his name, but the music stayed with me." "I miss the concerts we had in St. Louis," Zara said. "Before we moved west, my mother would take me to performances at least once a month." "Do you play?" Grant asked, nodding toward the piano in the corner. "Poorly," Zara laughed. "My teacher called me hopeless, but I enjoy it nonetheless. I'd like to hear you sometime." Their conversations ranged from the practical to the philosophical, and Zara found herself looking forward to his visits with increasing anticipation. By the time the Harvest Festival arrived in late October, nearly 2 months after the wedding debacle, she realized that the town's gossip had indeed found new subjects, and her own heart had begun to heal, perhaps even to hope again. The festival was held in the town square, with booths selling crafts and food, games for children, and in the evening, a dance in the newly constructed town hall. Zara had initially been reluctant to attend, but her mother insisted it was time to rejoin society fully. "You can't hide forever, dear," she said as she helped Zara arrange her hair. "And your new blue dress is too pretty to waste." The dress was indeed lovely, a deep sapphire that brought out the blue in her eyes. As they arrived at the festival, Zara was relieved to find that people greeted her normally, without the exaggerated sympathy or averted gazes of previous weeks. She was examining a display of handmade quilts when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Miss Zimmerman." She turned to find Grant, looking unusually formal in a crisp black suit, though his tan and the slight windburn on his cheeks still marked him as a man who worked outdoors. "Mr. Nicholson," she smiled. I didn't expect to see you here. I thought social gatherings weren't to your taste." "They're growing on me," he replied, his eyes warming as they took in her appearance. "That color suits you." Zara felt herself blushing and was grateful when her mother approached to exchange pleasantries with Grant, giving her a moment to compose herself. What was happening to her? This fluttering feeling when Grant was near, it was both familiar and different from what she had felt with Benjamin. With Benjamin, there had been excitement, yes, but also a constant desire to please, to be what she thought he wanted. With Grant, she felt herself. The realization startled her. She had been so consumed with the humiliation of being jilted that she hadn't stopped to consider whether Benjamin had truly been the right match for her. Perhaps the greatest blessing of that terrible day was escaping a marriage that would have demanded she become someone other than herself. "Zara." Her mother's voice broke into her thoughts. "Mr. Nicholson has asked if you would accompany him to view the horse races. Your father and I will be at the baking competition if you'd like to join us there afterward." Surprised at her mother's tacit approval, Zara nodded. "I'd like that very much." Grant offered his arm, and they made their way to the makeshift track at the edge of town where the races would be held. As they walked, Zara noticed several people watching them with interest, and she stiffened slightly. "Second thoughts?" Grant asked quietly. "No," she said firmly. "Let them talk if they wish. I'm tired of living my life worried about what others think." Grant's smile was approving. "That's the spirit." The races were exciting, with riders from all over the territory competing for modest prizes and substantial bragging rights. Grant explained the finer points of horse racing to her, his knowledge obvious in every observation. "Why didn't you enter Thunderbolt?" she asked during a lull between races. "He's being rested for the territorial championships next month in Carson City," Grant explained. "It's a much bigger purse and the competition will be fiercer." "Will you go?" "I have to," he nodded. "These races are important for establishing a reputation for breeding stock. If Thunderbolt performs well, it increases the value of all his offspring." "How long will you be gone?" Zara asked, surprised by the hint of dismay she felt at the prospect of his absence. "About a week if all goes well." He glanced at her. "Would you? Will you be here when I return?" The question seemed to hold more weight than its simple words. Zara met his gaze. "Where else would I be?" Something shifted in Grant's expression, a softening, a certainty. "Then I'll make sure to return as quickly as possible." The moment was interrupted by the start of the final race, but Zara's mind was only half on the thundering hooves and cheering crowd. The other half was contemplating the way Grant had looked at her, and what it might mean. As the afternoon waned, they rejoined her parents for the evening's dance. The town hall had been decorated with harvest themes: corn husks and pumpkins, autumn leaves and ribbons. A small band played lively tunes, and couples were already whirling around the floor. "May I have this dance, Miss Zimmerman?" Grant asked formally, extending his hand. Zara placed her fingers in his. "You may, Mr. Nicholson." He was a surprisingly good dancer, leading her confidently through the steps of the waltz. As they moved together, Zara gradually became aware of the eyes following them around the room. "Everyone is watching," she murmured. "Let them," Grant replied, his hand warm and steady at her waist. "They're just noticing what I already know." "And what's that?" His eyes held hers as they turned. "That you're the strongest woman in this town. Anyone who thinks you're to be pitied for what happened is a fool." The conviction in his voice made her heart swell. "Grant," she said softly, using his first name for the first time, "thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. Not the jilted bride, not the subject of gossip, just me." The dance ended, but they remained for a moment in their position, something unspoken passing between them. Then, aware of the attention they were attracting, They separated and moved to where refreshments were being served. The evening continued pleasantly, with Zara dancing several more times with Grant, and once each with her father and the mayor out of politeness. By the time they prepared to leave, she felt lighter than she had in months, as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Grant escorted the Zimmerman family to their carriage, helping each of them in turn. When it was Zara's turn, he held her hand a moment longer than necessary. "I'll call tomorrow before I leave for Carson City, if that's acceptable," he said. "I'd like that," Zara replied. As the carriage pulled away, her mother gave her a knowing look. "Mr. Nicholson seems quite attentive," she observed. "He's a friend," Zara said, though even to her own ears the word seemed inadequate. "Of course," her mother replied, but the small smile on her lips told Zara she wasn't fooled. That night, as she prepared for bed, Zara found herself humming the waltz she had danced with Grant. For the first time since the wedding day, she thought of Benjamin Porter without a pang of hurt or shame. Instead, she felt something like gratitude. If he hadn't revealed his true character before it was too late, she might never have discovered what genuine respect and admiration felt like, the kind she saw in Grant's eyes when he looked at her. True to his word, Grant called the next day to bid them farewell before his journey to Carson City. He brought a small gift for Zara, a book of poetry he had mentioned during one of their conversations. "For the evenings while I'm away," he said as she unwrapped it, "though I hope you won't find the poems too melancholy." "Tennyson," she read from the cover. "I've read some of his work, but I don't own any of his collections. Thank you." "There's a particular poem I thought you might appreciate," Grant said. "I've marked it." Later, alone in her room, Zara found the page he had dog-eared. It was Ulysses, a dramatic monologue about continuing to strive and seek new experiences even after hardship. The final lines caught her attention. "Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield." The message was clear. Grant was encouraging her to look forward, not back, to find strength in what remained rather than dwelling on what was lost. She pressed the book to her chest, oddly moved by his thoughtfulness. The week of Grant's absence seemed to stretch endlessly. Zara found herself watching the road north from town whenever she went out, though she knew it was far too soon for his return. She read Tennyson's poems each night, returning often to Ulysses and imagining Grant's voice reading the powerful lines. On the 6th day after his departure, Zara was helping in her father's store when a rider from Carson City delivered a telegram. Her father read it quickly, his eyebrows rising. Well," he said, handing it to Zara. "It seems our Mr. Nicholson has done quite well for himself." The telegram was brief but triumphant. "Thunderbolt Victoria Stop Championship purse secured. Stop returning tomorrow. Stop Grant. That's wonderful news," Zara said, trying to control the leap of her heart at the thought of seeing him again. Her father gave her a shrewd look. "Indeed. This win will establish him as one of the premier horse breeders in the territory. His prospects are considerably improved." "Father," Zara scolded gently, "you make it sound like a business transaction." "Isn't it all?" he replied with a wink. "But I jest. I've seen how he looks at you, Zara. And how you look at him. It's nothing like how you were with Porter." "What do you mean?" Her father considered his words carefully. "With Porter you seemed eager to please. With Nicholson you seem comfortable being yourself. There's a notable difference." Zara was startled by her father's perceptiveness. "I hadn't realized you noticed such things." "I'm a businessman," he shrugged. "Observing people is part of the trade." He paused, then added more seriously, Your mother and I only want your happiness, Zara. If Nicholson contributes to that, he's welcome in our home, regardless of what the gossips might say." Touched by her father's support, Zara impulsively kissed his cheek. "Thank you, father." The next morning, Zara took extra care with her appearance, choosing a green dress that she knew complemented her dark hair and fair skin. She was arranging flowers in the parlor when the maid announced Grant's arrival. He stood in the doorway, trail dust still on his boots but his face alight with triumph and something else when he saw her, a softening, a warmth that made her breath catch. "Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her, removing his hat. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all," she replied, setting aside the flowers. "We received your telegram. Congratulations on your victory." "Thank you." He stepped further into the room, seeming suddenly uncertain. "I brought you something from Carson City." From his pocket, he produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. Zara opened it to find a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a rose. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It reminded me of you," Grant said. "Beautiful, but with strength underneath. Roses have thorns after all." Zara laughed. "Are you calling me thorny, Mr. Nicholson?" His eyes crinkled. "Perhaps resilient is a better word." "I'll accept that," she said, pinning the brooch to her dress. "Thank you. It's perfect." There was a moment of silence between them, filled with unspoken words. Finally, Grant cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you might like to accompany me on a ride tomorrow. The weather is fine, and there's a spot north of town, a meadow with a view of the mountains that's particularly beautiful this time of year." "I'd love to," Zara said, perhaps too quickly. "I mean, if Mother approves, of course." "Of course," Grant agreed, though the gleam in his eye suggested he was as eager as she was. "Shall we say 10 o'clock? I'll bring a picnic lunch." When Grant left, Zara found herself standing by the window, watching him stride down the street. There was a lightness in her step that hadn't been there before, a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with societal expectations or fulfilling a predetermined role. This feeling was entirely her own. Her mother appeared beside her. "He seems in good spirits," she observed. "He won the championship," Zara replied. "Of course he's pleased." "I don't think that's the only reason," her mother said shrewdly. Then, after a pause, "He's asked you to go riding, hasn't he?" Zara turned to her mother in surprise. "How did you know?" A mother knows these things. She patted Zara's hand. "Samuel will accompany you as chaperone, naturally, but I see no reason to object. Mr. Nicholson has proven himself a gentleman." The following day dawned clear and cool, perfect for riding. Zara wore her riding habit and a hat with a small veil that would protect her face from the sun. Grant arrived precisely at 10, leading Thunderbolt and a gentle bay mare for Zara. "I thought you might like to meet the champion," he explained as he helped her mount the mare. "Thunderbolt's too spirited for most riders, but I thought you'd appreciate an introduction." Samuel mounted his own horse, and the three set off north out of town. Once they reached the open country, Grant allowed Thunderbolt more freedom and the stallion pranced sideways, clearly proud of himself and eager to run. "He knows he's special," Zara observed, laughing at the horse's antics. "That he does," Grant agreed. "The harder the competition, the more determined he becomes. It's like he lives for the challenge." They rode for about an hour before reaching the meadow Grant had described. It was even more beautiful than he had promised, a wide expanse of grass dotted with late wildflowers, with a clear view of the mountains rising blue and majestic in the distance. Samuel discreetly positioned himself at the edge of the meadow, close enough to see them but far enough to allow some privacy for conversation. Grant spread a blanket on the grass and unpacked a basket containing bread, cheese, cold chicken, and a bottle of lemonade. As they ate, Grant told Zara about the races in Carson City, the competitors he'd met, and the offers he'd received for Thunderbolt services as a stud. "I turned most of them down," he said. "I'm selective about which mares he's bred to. Bloodlines matter." "A true horseman," Zara smiled. "My father says your win will establish you as one of the territory's premier breeders." "He's right," Grant nodded. "It's what I've been working toward since I came to Nevada." He paused, then added more quietly, "Though lately, I've been thinking there are more important things than success with horses." Zara felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. "Such as family," Grant said simply. "A home that's more than just a house and land. Someone to share the victories with and the defeats." The air between them seemed to still. Zara looked down at her hands, then back up at Grant. "I thought I wanted that once, with Benjamin, but now I realize I didn't really know what it meant." "And now," Grant's voice was gentle. "Now I think I'm beginning to understand," she replied softly. Grant reached across the blanket and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Zara," he began, but whatever he was about to say was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. They both turned to see a rider approaching at speed across the meadow. As the figure drew closer, Zara felt a cold shock of recognition. The set of the shoulders, the way he leaned forward in the saddle, it was Benjamin Porter. Grant was on his feet immediately, moving to stand protectively between Zara and the approaching rider. Samuel had also noticed and was riding toward them, his expression concerned. Benjamin reined his horse to a stop a few yards away. He looked thinner than Zara remembered, with several days' growth of beard and wild eyes. "Zara," he called, dismounting. "Thank God I found you." Grant's posture was rigid with tension. "Porter," he said coldly, "you're not welcome here." Benjamin ignored him, his attention fixed on Zara, who had also risen to her feet. "Zara, please, I need to explain. Nancy and I were separated when I met you. I thought the divorce was final, but there was a problem with the paperwork." "Stop," Zara said, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt at seeing him again. "There's nothing you can say that would make any difference now." "But I love you," Benjamin protested, taking a step forward. "What we had was real." Grant moved subtly, keeping himself between them. "The lady asked you to stop, Porter." Benjamin's eyes darted to Grant, then back to Zara. "So this is how it is. Not 2 months since our wedding day and you're already with someone else." The accusation stung, but Zara refused to show it. "You have no right to question my choices, Benjamin. You lied to me from the beginning. Everything between us was built on deception." "I made a mistake," Benjamin admitted, his tone turning pleading. "A terrible mistake. But Nancy's gone back to St. Louis for good. We can still be together, Zara. We can start over somewhere new where no one knows us." The desperation in his voice might once have moved her, but now Zara felt only pity and a lingering anger. "No, Benjamin. Whatever I thought I felt for you died the moment that woman walked into the chapel. Please, just go." Benjamin's face hardened. "It's because of him, isn't it?" He jerked his head toward Grant. "What did he comfort the jilted bride? Take advantage of your vulnerability?" Grant's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained controlled. "That's enough, Porter. You've said your piece. Now leave before I forget that Miss Zimmerman wouldn't want violence on her account." Samuel had reached them by now and sat astride his horse just behind Benjamin, a silent reminder that the confrontation had witnesses. Benjamin looked from Grant to Zara, then back again. Something in his expression changed, a realization, perhaps, or a final letting go. "You deserve better than me," he said quietly to Zara. "I hope he is." Without another word, he remounted his horse and rode away, not looking back. Zara watched him go, feeling a complex mix of emotions: relief, sadness for what might have been, but mostly a sense of true closure. "Are you all right?" Grant asked, turning to her once Benjamin was out of sight. Zara took a deep breath, then nodded. "Yes, surprisingly so." She looked up at him. "Thank you for being here." Grant's expression was concerned. "Do you want to return to town?" "No," Zara said firmly. "I won't let him ruin today. Besides," she added with a small smile, "I believe you were about to say something important before we were interrupted." The tension eased from Grant's shoulders and something like hope flickered in his eyes. "Perhaps we should sit down again." They settled back on the blanket, Samuel discreetly returning to his previous position at the edge of the meadow. The encounter with Benjamin had shifted something between them, a veil lifted, a pretense abandoned. "Zara," Grant began again, taking her hand. "I'm not a man of many words, as you know. I prefer actions to speeches, but some things need to be said plainly." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I saw you in that chapel 2 months ago, standing alone in your wedding dress after Porter ran, something in me recognized something in you. A strength, a dignity even in the face of humiliation." Zara squeezed his hand, encouraging him to continue. "I didn't plan what happened next, offering to finish those vows with you. It just seemed right. And in the weeks since then, getting to know you, I've realized that moment was more significant than I knew." His eyes, warm and earnest, held hers. "I meant those vows, Zara, not as a stranger offering comfort, but as a man who could see himself promising those things to you in truth someday." Zara's heart raced. "Grant, I'm not asking for promises now," he hurried on. "It's too soon and you've been through too much, but I want you to know my intentions. I care for you deeply. And when you're ready, if you ever are, I would be honored to stand before a preacher with you again." This time with no interruptions. Tears pricked at Zara's eyes, not from sadness but from an overwhelming sense of rightness. "I care for you too," she said softly. "More than I thought possible after everything that happened. You've shown me what real respect looks like, what it means to be valued for who I am, not who someone wants me to be." Grant's expression was tender as he reached up to brush a tear from her cheek. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." "I don't need much time," Zara admitted. "The heart knows what it knows, Grant, and mine recognizes yours." The look that passed between them was more intimate than any touch could be, a recognition, a promise, a beginning. By unspoken agreement, they didn't rush to define what would come next. Instead, they finished their picnic, talking of everyday things but with a new awareness humming between them. As they rode back to town, Zara felt as if she were seeing the landscape with new eyes. The same hills and valleys, the same distant mountains, but everything seemed more vivid, more alive. Benjamin's appearance, rather than reopening old wounds, had somehow helped heal them completely. She could look to the future now without the shadow of the past hanging over her. In the weeks that followed, Grant began calling at the Zimmerman home regularly. There was no formal declaration to society, but everyone in Las Vegas soon understood that he was courting Zara. The gossips found new topics, and any lingering scandal from the aborted wedding faded as people accepted the new attachment. As November turned to December, preparations for Christmas occupied the town. Zara threw herself into the festivities, helping organize a children's pageant and decorating the church. Grant, though claiming to have little artistic talent, was drafted into building a stable for the nativity scene, a task he took on with good-humored dedication. "I've never seen a carpenter look so handsome," Zara teased as she brought him a cup of hot cider one afternoon while he worked. Grant smiled, setting down his hammer to accept the drink. "And I've never seen an angel as beautiful as you," he replied, nodding at the wings she wore for her role in directing the children. "Flattery will get you everywhere, Mr. Nicholson," she laughed. Is that so? His eyes twinkled. Then perhaps I should mention how the lamplight brings out the gold in your hair, or how your smile makes me forget what I was going to say next. Zara blushed, still unaccustomed to such open admiration, despite the months of his courtship. Grant, she protested softly, aware of the church ladies bustling around them. He lowered his voice. I have something to ask you, but not here. Will you ride with me tomorrow? There's a place I'd like to show you. Curiosity piqued, Zara agreed. The next day, with Samuel again as chaperone, they rode north beyond the meadow where they had picnicked, following a narrow trail that wound up into the foothills. After about an hour, they reached a promontory overlooking a small valley. A clear stream ran through it and patches of pine forest dotted the landscape. It's beautiful, Zara said, taking in the view. It's mine, Grant replied quietly. Or it will be once the paperwork is complete. I'm expanding the rocking inn. Zara turned to him in surprise. You're buying more land, but your ranch is already substantial. A man should think of the future, Grant said, of what he'll leave to his children someday. His gaze was steady on hers. I had planned to wait until Christmas to ask you this, but I find I don't want to wait another day. Zara's heart began to race as Grant dismounted and came to help her down from her mare. Samuel, understanding the moment, discreetly moved his horse some distance away, giving them privacy while remaining within sight. Grant took both her hands in his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. Zara Zimmerman, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, seeing your strength and your kindness, your wit and your wisdom, it's been like watching the sunrise after a long night. Grant, Zara whispered, her voice catching. I promised you time, he continued, and I meant it. But I also want you to know the depth of my feelings, the certainty of my heart. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. This was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died, telling me to save it for the woman who would be my partner in all things. He opened the box to reveal a ring with a modest diamond flanked by 2 small sapphires. I'm not asking you to wear it yet, if you're not ready. But I am asking if, someday when you are ready, you would do me the great honor of becoming my wife. Tears welled in Zara's eyes as she looked from the ring to Grant's face, so full of hope and love. In that moment, all doubts vanished. The wounds of her past had healed, replaced by a certainty that this man, this love was what she had always been meant to find. I don't need someday, Grant, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. I'm ready now. Yes, I will marry you. Joy blazed across Grant's face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. He drew her close, his arms strong around her waist, and looked down at her with such tenderness that Zara felt her heart might burst. May I? He asked softly, his gaze dropping to her lips. In answer, Zara rose on tiptoe and pressed her mouth to his. The kiss was gentle at first, a meeting of souls as much as bodies, but it deepened as Grant pulled her closer. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Zara saw in his eyes the same wonder she felt. I love you, Grant said simply. And I love you, Zara replied, the words feeling both new and as familiar as her own heartbeat. They stood together on the promontory, looking out over the land that would be their future, hands entwined and hearts aligned. The path ahead would have its challenges, as all lives do, but in that moment, both knew with absolute certainty that they would face whatever came together. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Las Vegas. Most received it with genuine pleasure, especially those who had witnessed Zara's dignity throughout the previous scandal. A few raised eyebrows at the relatively short time since her aborted wedding, but Zara found she cared little for such opinions. What mattered was the approval of those she loved, her parents, who had come to respect and appreciate Grant, and her closest friends, who saw how happy he made her. They set the wedding date for April, when the desert would be in bloom. This time, the preparations were simpler, focused on the meaning of the ceremony rather than its trappings. Zara chose a new dress, unwilling to wear the one from her previous attempt, but in every other way she approached this wedding with a quiet confidence that had been absent before. "Are you nervous?" her mother asked on the morning of the wedding day as she helped Zara with her hair. "Not at all," Zara replied truthfully. "With Benjamin, I was anxious about everything being perfect, about being the bride everyone expected. With Grant," she smiled at her reflection. "With Grant, I know that what matters is what comes after the ceremony, not the ceremony itself." Her mother squeezed her shoulders. "You've grown, my dear. I'm proud of you." The church was filled with flowers and sunlight when Zara walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Grant waited at the altar, his eyes never leaving hers as she approached. There was no hesitation, no doubt, only certainty and joy. When the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, a brief silence fell. Zara couldn't help but remember the gunshot that had shattered her previous wedding day, but this time, the silence remained unbroken. The congregation released a collective breath, and a few knowing smiles were exchanged. Grant's hands were steady as he placed the ring on her finger, his voice clear and sure as he recited his vows. "I, Grant, take you, Zara, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As Zara spoke her own vows, she felt the rightness of the words, the truth of the promise she was making. This was no performance, no fulfillment of social expectation, but a covenant between equals, entered with full hearts and clear eyes. "By the power vested in me," the preacher said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." He smiled at Grant. "You may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief but tender, a promise of all that would come. As they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Nicholson for the first time, Zara felt a sense of completion, of having found her place in the world. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music and dancing continuing well into the evening. As the night drew to a close, Grant led Zara to a waiting carriage that would take them to the Rocking Inn Ranch, their home now together. "Happy, Mrs. Nicholson?" Grant asked as he helped her into the carriage. Zara looked up at him, this man who had first seen her strength when she felt weakest, who had valued her for exactly who she was. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied. As the carriage pulled away, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. What had seemed like an ending that terrible day at the altar when Benjamin fled had in fact been a beginning. Sometimes, she thought, what appeared to be our greatest humiliations could become our greatest blessings, if we had the courage to keep our hearts open. Grant's arm was warm around her shoulders as they traveled toward their future together. Ahead lay the life they would build, the expanded ranch, the children they hoped for, the partnership of equals they had already begun. Behind lay the pain and disappointment that had ultimately led her to this greater joy. "Then let me finish the vows," Grant had said that day in the chapel, offering comfort to a stranger. Neither of them could have known then that those words would be the first step on a path that would lead them here, to real vows, to a real marriage, to a love built on respect and understanding. The carriage rolled onward under the vast Nevada sky, carrying Zara and Grant toward their shared horizon, not an ending, but a beginning written in the stars. Years later, when their children asked how they had met, Zara would tell the story not with shame or regret, but with gratitude for the twisting path that had led her to true love. And Grant would always smile at the part where he'd offered to finish the vows, saying it was the most impulsive thing he'd ever done and the best decision he'd ever made. In the end, Zara reflected, it wasn't about who left you at the altar, but who stood beside you afterward, not just for the vows, but for all the days that followed, the ordinary and the extraordinary moments that made up a life well lived and a love well earned. And as she looked across their ranch house at Grant, gray now touching his temples but his eyes still holding the same warmth they had that first day in the chapel, she knew with absolute certainty that some promises were worth keeping, some vows worth finishing, and some loves worth waiting for, even if the waiting had been brief, the recognition immediate, and the journey unexpected in all the best possible ways.